There are currents in a life that run so deep and so slow you don't notice their pull until you are miles from the shore you thought was yours. For months, my current had a name, and it was Julian. It had the precise weight of his head on my shoulder, the specific warmth of his body curled against mine on the worn corduroy of my sofa, and the quiet, rhythmic sound of his breathing as he slept through the flickering blues and grays of some black and white film he'd never actually finish. This had become our ritual, a silent sacrament performed 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. He would arrive under the guise of exhaustion, a casualty of his consulting job that sent him across time zones and returned him frayed at the edges. He'd bring takeout, or I'd have made soup, and we'd settle onto the couch, the vast, unspoken territory between us shrinking inch by careful inch as the evening wore on. And every single time, as the credits rolled and his breathing evened out into the deep cadence of sleep, I would be left with the same agonizing, hopeful decision. I would gently disentangle myself, a process as delicate as diffusing a bomb, and retreat to my bedroom, leaving the door ajar. Just a crack. Just enough for a sliver of light from the hallway to spill onto the living room floor, a silent, cowardly invitation. It was a question I could never bring myself to ask aloud, left hanging in the architecture of my apartment. It's strange to think that our friendship was forged in chlorine and competition, in the echoing, cavernous space of a university natatorium. We were rivals in the most classic sense. I was the quiet, methodical distance swimmer for our university, all about pacing and endurance, a grinder. Julian was the explosive, charismatic sprinter for our crosstown rival, a creature of pure power and dazzling form. He was everything I wasn't. Where I was reserved, he was effusive. Where I saw swimming as a meditative battle against myself, he saw it as a public spectacle, a war to be won against the man in the next lane. Our names were always mentioned in the same breath by sports columnists for the student paper, 2 opposing forces in the local collegiate swimming scene. We disliked each other on principle before we'd ever had a real conversation. Our interactions were limited to terse nods behind the starting blocks and the unavoidable, awkward proximity of the warm-down lanes, where the turbulence of his kick felt like a personal affront to the calm I was trying to cultivate. The arguments started one evening after a particularly grueling invitational meet. He had outtouched me in the 200-meter freestyle by 1/100th of a second, a victory he'd celebrated with a triumphant roar and a splash that had drenched the timekeepers. I was stewing in the locker room, replaying the final stroke in my head, when he walked in, still radiating a cocky energy that felt like sandpaper on my raw nerves. He said something about my turn at the 150 mark, how it was technically perfect but lacked aggression. I, in turn, told him his start was pure brute force, a display of undisciplined power that would burn him out in any race longer than a splash and dash. That was the spark. We stood there, smelling of chlorine and righteous indignation, wrapped in damp towels, and debated fluid dynamics, training philosophies, and the very soul of the sport until the janitors started turning off the lights. We were the last 2 to leave, walking out into the cool night air, the argument having lost its heat and morphed into something else, something closer to a real conversation. It became our thing. We'd find each other after meets, or even just after practice if our schedules overlapped, and we would argue. We argued about everything. The merits of high-volume versus high-intensity training, the best way to taper for a championship, the psychological toll of the sport. The arguments were our strange, convoluted way of getting to know each other, a language of respectful opposition. We were mapping the boundaries of each other's minds, and I found myself, to my immense surprise, enjoying the cartography. I think I fell in love with him not in the water, but in the library. It was senior year, finals week. I was holed up in a remote corral, surrounded by stacks of books on the history of photography, trying to cram a semester's worth of theory into my sleep-deprived brain. I hadn't seen him in weeks. Our seasons were over, our rivalry officially concluded. Then, I heard a familiar voice cut through the reverent hush of the 4th floor. "Don't you ever get tired of being so damn quiet, Liam?" He was standing there, a cocky grin on his face, holding 2 coffees. He was a software engineering major, and his own finals were notoriously brutal. Yet there he was, on the wrong side of campus, seeking me out. He sat down, and for the next hour, we didn't argue. He asked me about my photography. He looked through my portfolio, his usual bravado replaced by a genuine, quiet curiosity. He lingered on a portrait I'd taken of another swimmer, a stark black and white shot that focused on the exhaustion in her eyes. He said, "You see things differently. You see that after everyone else just sees the race." That was it. That was the moment the current shifted. He saw me, not as his rival, not as the quiet guy in lane 4, but as me. My heart did a stupid, clumsy flip, a pathetic betrayal of the disciplined control I prided myself on. The affection, once a flicker, ignited. It was a secret I learned to keep with the same discipline I applied to my training, a hidden, burning thing I carried with me as we graduated, and, by some twist of fate, both found jobs in the same city. Our friendship deepened in the real world. Without the structure of competition to define us, we had to find a new equilibrium. He was a consultant, traveling constantly, living a life of airports and client dinners and spreadsheets that made my head spin. I was a freelance photographer, piecing together a living from architectural shoots, headshots, and the occasional art sale, my life a study in quiet observation and unpredictable income. We were still opposites, but our differences became complementary. He would call me from a hotel room in another time zone, his voice a balm against the sterile hum of the air conditioning, and I would listen to him vent about corporate politics. In return, he would show up at my gallery openings, bringing a crowd of his loud, cheerful friends who would actually buy prints, their presence a buffer against my own social anxiety. He had a girlfriend, Sarah, a kind and intelligent lawyer he'd been with since college. She was a fixture, a part of the package. I liked her genuinely. Their relationship was a solid, established fact, a mountain range on the map of our friendship that I knew better than to try and cross. It made my feelings for him safe. They were theoretical, a thought experiment. I could love him from a distance. This secret contained flame, and it would never have to touch or burn anything in the real world. He was my best friend. It was a role I cherished, a boundary I policed with military precision. I was the keeper of his stories, the quiet harbor where he could dock between his exhausting voyages into the corporate world. And for a long time, that was enough. The shift, when it came, was not a sudden earthquake, but a slow, grinding tectonic event. It began with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday in October. It was Julian, his voice hollowed out, stripped of its usual confident cadence. He was at a bar near his office, and he sounded 3 drinks past sensible. "She's gone, Liam," he said, and the words were so flat they barely registered. "Sarah. She moved out. I didn't ask what happened." The details felt intrusive, irrelevant in the face of the raw emptiness in his voice. I just said, "Where are you? I'll come get you." I found him slumped in a booth, staring into a half-empty glass of whiskey. The usual light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, bewildered hurt. I drove him back to his apartment, the one he had shared with Sarah for 3 years. The emptiness of it was staggering. Her absence was a physical presence in the room, carved out of the spaces on the bookshelves, the blank spot on the wall where a painting used to hang, the hollow echo in the closet. He stood in the middle of the living room, looking like a stranger in his own life. He looked at me, his face a mask of lost confusion. "I don't think I can stay here tonight," he whispered. Is it okay if I crash on your couch?" And so the ritual began. It started as a necessity, a temporary solution to an immediate crisis. His apartment felt like a tomb, he said, haunted by the ghost of a shared future. My small, cluttered one-bedroom, with its scent of darkroom chemicals and brewing coffee, became his sanctuary. That first night, I gave him a set of sweatpants and a clean t-shirt, set him up with blankets and a pillow on the couch, and retreated to my room, closing the door firmly behind me. It felt important to maintain that boundary, to reinforce the platonic nature of the arrangement. He was my friend, and he was hurting. I was the safe harbor, nothing more. But one night became 2, then a week. He would go to his apartment to shower and get clothes for work, but his evenings were spent with me. The excuse of the haunted apartment began to wear thin, replaced by a simpler, more honest reason: exhaustion. His work travel intensified, and the breakup had taken a profound emotional toll. He was running on fumes. The couch became the centerpiece of our evenings. We'd fall into a routine. I'd be editing photos at my desk when he'd arrive, dropping his keys and laptop bag with a heavy sigh. We'd eat, talk a little about his day, my day. Then we'd migrate to the couch and put on a movie. We always chose old ones, black and white films from the 40s or 50s. I think we both liked the distance of them. The way their stylized emotions and clear-cut narratives felt comfortingly remote from the messy, undefined feelings in the room. The first time he touched me, it was so subtle I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. He had been leaning against the opposite arm of the sofa, a respectable distance between us. But as the movie wore on, he began to list, his body slowly, almost imperceptibly, tilting toward me. First, his knee brushed against mine. I froze, my entire consciousness narrowing to that single point of contact. He didn't pull away. 10 minutes later, his shoulder was pressed against mine. His warmth seeped through the fabric of my shirt, a low, steady heat. I didn't breathe for a full minute, waiting for him to move, to realize, to retreat. He never did. He just sighed, a soft, weary sound, and settled more firmly against me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild thing. I tried to focus on the movie, on the witty banter of Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, but their voices were just a distant murmur. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. All I could feel was the solid, grounding pressure of Julian beside me. From there, the ritual escalated, each step a quiet transgression of our old boundaries. The leaning became a given. The next stage was his head on my shoulder. It happened during a Hitchcock film, the tension on screen a pale imitation of the tension coiling in my stomach. He had been quiet for a long time, and I thought he'd fallen asleep sitting up. Then, I felt the weight of his head settle into the crook of my neck and shoulder. His hair, which always smelled faintly of the expensive shampoo he used and the city air, brushed against my cheek. I sat ramrod straight, a statue carved from pure anxiety, every muscle tensed. I was terrified that if I moved, if I even breathed too deeply, the spell would break. He murmured something, his voice thick with oncoming sleep. "Is this okay?" I couldn't find my voice. I just nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. He seemed to take that as a yes, letting out another sigh and relaxing completely, surrendering his full weight to me. I sat there for 2 hours, long after the movie ended and the screen went black, my arm numb, my neck aching, but I didn't care. I was a living piece of furniture, a sanctuary, and it was the most exquisite torture I had ever known. I was holding the thing I wanted most in the world, and I was terrified it was only because he saw me as something safe, something sexless. A brother, a friend, a couch. The living room of my apartment is small, a simple rectangle with high ceilings, and a large, north-facing window that floods the space with a cool, indirect light perfect for portraiture. My bedroom door is on the wall opposite that window. For years, that door had been just a door. It was a simple, functional object, the boundary between my public and private spaces. But after Julian started staying, it became a symbol. It became the repository of all my unspoken hope and fear. After he would fall asleep on the couch, I would perform the delicate operation of moving. I would wait until his breathing was deep and even, then slowly, carefully, I'd lift his head and slide a pillow into his place. I'd drape a blanket over him, my fingers sometimes brushing against his arm or his cheek, a touch that felt like holding a live wire. Then I would walk the 10 feet to my bedroom, and every night, I would pause with my hand on the doorknob, my own personal Rubicon. To close it completely felt like a rejection, a final, definitive statement that this space was mine and he was not welcome in it. It felt like reinforcing a friendship I was secretly, desperately hoping to betray. To leave it wide open felt impossibly forward, an act of such blatant, presumptuous invitation that it made my stomach clench with shame. So I found the compromise. The crack. A few inches of open space. It was a loophole, a piece of plausible deniability. If he woke up, disoriented and lonely in the dark, he would see the light, a pathway. He could interpret it as an accident, an oversight, and I could pretend it was, too. I would lie in my own bed, staring at the sliver of light the hallway cast on my ceiling, and I would listen. I'd listen for the rustle of the blanket, for the sound of footsteps on the old hardwood floor. I'd listen for the soft creak of my bedroom door opening wider. It never happened, but every night, I left it open. Every night, I hoped. My photography began to change. I've always been drawn to spaces, to the way light and shadow can tell the story of a room, the way architecture can hold the memory of the people who inhabit it. I started a new series, untitled, of domestic interiors at night. My own apartment. I'd set up my large format camera on its tripod after Julian was asleep, the process slow and methodical, a calming counterpoint to the chaos in my chest. I took a photo of the couch, the indentation on the cushion where his head had been, the blanket rumpled and cast aside. I took a photo of the 2 coffee mugs on the table, one half full. I took a photo of his shoes by the door, scuffed and weary. And I took so many photos of the door. The bedroom door ajar. I experimented with different exposures, capturing the faint, hazy glow of the hallway light, the deep, impenetrable black of the room beyond. I was trying to capture the feeling of it, the unbearable tension of that negative space, the hope and the futility. My professor, a woman whose opinion I deeply respected, saw the early prints. She said, "There's a tremendous sense of longing in these, Liam. It feels like someone is waiting for a ghost to walk through that door." She had no idea how right she was. One Saturday it rained. A cold, miserable, all-day rain that turned the city gray and slick. Julian was supposed to be in Chicago for the weekend, a trip for work, but his flight was canceled. He showed up at my door around noon, looking damp and dejected. "The universe has decreed I shall not attend a quarterly budget review," he announced, a weak attempt at his usual humor. "Can I take shelter here?" We spent the day doing nothing. We ordered pizza, watched a terrible action movie, and talked. The rain created a sense of isolation, as if my small apartment was a bubble, a world unto itself. We weren't on the couch. We were sitting on the floor, leaning against it, the conversation meandering from his frustrations at work to my anxieties about an upcoming gallery submission. He talked about Sarah, for the first time without the raw, hollowed-out pain. He spoke of their time together with a kind of sad, detached fondness, like he was describing a movie he'd once seen. "It's weird," he said, staring at the rain streaking down the window pane. "I spent so long trying to be the person I thought she wanted me to be. I don't even know if I know who I am without that." He looked at me then, his gaze direct and searching. "You've always been just. You've never seemed to care what anyone else thinks." "That's not true," I said quietly. "I care what you think." The words were out before I could stop them. They hung in the air between us, small and vulnerable. He didn't laugh or make a joke. He just held my gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then he looked away, back at the window. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know." The ritual had become so ingrained that any deviation felt seismic. The final stage of its evolution happened a few weeks after the rainy Saturday. It was a Tuesday, another long day for him. He was quieter than usual during dinner, his face tight, with a stress he wouldn't articulate. When we settled on the couch, he didn't just lean against me. He laid down, resting his head in my lap. Just like that. No preamble, no hesitation. One moment he was sitting beside me. The next he was stretched out, his head pillowed on my thighs, his long legs bent at the knee to fit on the small sofa. I froze, my body turning to stone. I could feel the warmth of his scalp through the thin fabric of my jeans. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his hair. He closed his eyes, and one of his hands came to rest on my stomach, his fingers loosely curled. I looked down at him, at the dark sweep of his eyelashes against his cheek, the slight parting of his lips as his breathing began to slow. My hand was resting on the cushion right beside his head. It would be so easy, I thought, to reach out, to brush the hair from his forehead, to trace the line of his jaw. The desire was a physical ache, a sharp, painful clenching in my chest. I didn't do it. I just sat there, my hand curled into a fist, my knuckles white. He was offering me a level of intimacy that was both breathtaking and terrifying. It was an intimacy built on the pretense of his exhaustion and my role as the safe, accommodating friend. He was asleep, or pretending to be. He had plausible deniability. But I was wide awake, and I was drowning. It was the silence that finally broke me. Or maybe it was the silence that finally broke him. It was a Thursday night in late November. The first real cold snap of the year had hit, and the old radiator in my apartment was hissing and clanking, a rhythmic, metallic heartbeat. We had just finished watching The Third Man, and the sharp, zither-heavy score still seemed to hang in the air. Julian was in his usual position, head in my lap, body stretched out on the couch. I was doing my usual statue impression, my gaze fixed on the television, which was now scrolling through a menu of other black and white classics. But something was different. His breathing wasn't the deep, even rhythm of sleep. It was lighter, more conscious. And his hand, resting on my stomach, wasn't completely still. His thumb was moving, making a small, barely perceptible circle against the fabric of my shirt. It was a tiny movement, but it felt like a tectonic shift. It was intentional. He wasn't asleep. He was awake. He was awake, and he was touching me, and he knew that I knew he was awake. The air in the room became thick, heavy, charged with all the things we hadn't said for months. The hissing of the radiator seemed to grow louder, counting down to something. I didn't know what to do. My mind was a frantic, screaming void. Should I say his name? Should I pretend I hadn't noticed? Should I move his hand? Every option felt like the wrong one, a step onto a minefield. He was the one who broke the silence. He shifted, lifting his head from my lap. The sudden loss of his warmth and weight was jarring. He sat up, swinging his legs to the floor, but he didn't move away. He just sat beside me on the couch, leaving only a few inches between us. He didn't look at me. He stared at his hands, which were clasped between his knees. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. I could feel his nervousness as a palpable force, a vibration in the air. "Liam," he said, his voice quiet and rough. He cleared his throat. I'm not tired, my heart, which had been hammering, seemed to stop altogether. "I know," I managed to say. My own voice sounded foreign, a stranger's. He risked a glance at me then, quick and furtive, before his gaze dropped back to his hands. His knuckles were white. "I haven't been," he said, a confession. "Not really. Not for a while." The admission hung between us, dismantling the entire foundation of our ritual. All those nights, all that plausible deniability, it was all a lie. A gentle lie, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. He had been choosing this. He had been choosing to be close to me, consciously. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't know what to say. The script I had been working from for months was useless. The role of the accommodating, oblivious friend had been rendered obsolete. I was just me, and he was just him, and we were two people sitting on a couch in the dark, the truth finally laid bare between us. I watched him, the tension in his shoulders, the way he was worrying his lower lip with his teeth. He looked young and scared. The bravado, the easy confidence that had defined him in college and that he still wore like a well-tailored suit in his professional life, was gone. In its place was a raw, uncertain vulnerability I had only glimpsed before. He had come to me broken after Sarah left, and I had thought my job was to help him put the pieces back together. But I was beginning to realize that maybe some of the pieces didn't fit anymore, and he was trying to figure out what to do with them. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, his gaze steady and filled with a desperate, questioning sincerity. The ambient light from the street lamp outside cast his face in shadow and highlight, like one of my own photographs. He looked beautiful and breakable. "Would it be okay?" he started, his voice barely a whisper. He faltered, then took a breath and tried again. "Liam, would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was not a proposition. It was a plea. It was a white flag. It was the most terrifying and wonderful thing I had ever heard. All the air left my body. All the months of silent yearning, of careful analysis, of hope and despair, all of it coalesced into this single moment. The world narrowed to his face, to the earnest fear in his eyes. He was giving me the choice. He was giving me all the power. He was making himself completely, utterly vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, he was offering me everything. My throat was tight, my voice trapped behind a dam of emotion. I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. A single, slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't enough. He needed to hear it. I saw the flicker of doubt, of fear that he had misread this, too. I forced myself to breathe, to find the word. Yes, the word was a puff of air, almost inaudible, but in the thick silence of the room, it landed with the force of a thunderclap. A wave of relief washed over his face, so profound it was like watching a mask dissolve. He leaned in slowly, giving me every possible chance to pull away, to change my mind. I didn't move. I met him halfway. His lips were soft, hesitant. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a question, an exploration. It was tentative and gentle and tasted faintly of the coffee we'd had hours earlier. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek, and the simple, reverent touch undid me. I felt a tremor run through my entire body. I brought my own hand up to rest on his wrist, holding him there, anchoring the moment. It was a kiss that lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like it rearranged my entire internal architecture. The secret room I had kept my feelings for him locked inside for years was suddenly, irrevocably, thrown open. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His breathing was shaky. Okay, he breathed out, the word a sigh. Okay. We stayed like that for a long time, foreheads pressed together, his hand on my face, mine on his wrist, the silence no longer tense but filled with a fragile, tremulous peace. The ritual was over. Something new had begun. The morning was a shock of cold, gray light. I woke up slowly, tangled in my own sheets, a phantom warmth still lingering on my lips. For a moment, a disoriented, blissful moment, I forgot. Then it all came flooding back. The confession, the question, the kiss. A slow, stupid smile spread across my face. I lay there, replaying the moment, the softness of his lips, the gentle scrape of his stubble, the look in his eyes. I felt a sense of lightness, of giddy, terrifying hope. I finally threw back the covers and walked into the living room, my heart doing a nervous, excited flutter. The room was empty. The blanket I had draped over the couch countless times was folded neatly on the cushion. The coffee mugs were gone from the table, washed, and sitting in the dish rack by the sink. His shoes were gone from the door. He was gone. The emptiness of the room was a physical blow, a punch to the gut. It was a scene of such neat, deliberate departure that it screamed premeditation. He hadn't just woken up and left. He had tidied up. He had erased himself. I checked my phone, my hand trembling slightly. There was a single text message, sent at 5:32 a.m. Hey, sorry I had to bail. Early meeting I forgot about. Last night was. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Liam. I shouldn't have done that. I was confused. It was a mistake, a mistake. The word was a knife. Confused. Shouldn't have done that. Each phrase was a careful, calculated step back, a reconstruction of the walls he had so bravely torn down just hours before. The hope that had filled my chest moments earlier curdled into something cold and heavy. I sank onto the couch, the neatly folded blanket a cruel mockery. I had been a fool. A complete, utter cliché of a fool. I had taken his loneliness, his post-breakup confusion, and I had projected my own years of longing onto it. He had been looking for comfort, any comfort, and I had been the most convenient source. The kiss hadn't been a beginning. It had been a symptom of his own unresolved chaos, an impulse he regretted the moment the sun came up. The shame was a physical sensation, a hot flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. I felt naive, pathetic. All my careful observation, my analysis of his every gesture, it was all just wishful thinking. I hadn't been reading the signs. I had been inventing them. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, hopeful silence of our evenings on the couch. It was a dead, empty silence. A void. He didn't call. He didn't text again. My phone, which had become a lifeline, a constant source of connection to him, was inert. 2 days passed, then 4, a week. With each passing day, the hurt solidified into a dull, throbbing anger. It wasn't just anger at him, but at myself. Angry for being so passive, for letting him dictate the terms of our entire relationship, for living in the ambiguous gray area for so long. I had built a home for him out of my own patient affection, and he had treated it like a hotel, a convenient place to stay until he felt better, checking out without even paying the bill. The worst part was that I missed him. I missed his presence in my apartment, the sound of his key in the lock, his weary sigh at the end of the day. The quiet that I had once cherished now felt oppressive, a constant reminder of his absence. My apartment felt like his had after Sarah left, haunted. My work became my only refuge. I threw myself into the series of my apartment interiors. The photos took on a new, sharper edge. The longing was still there, but now it was laced with something colder. The empty couch, the neatly folded blanket, the closed bedroom door. It was all evidence of an absence. My professor saw the new prints and nodded slowly. "The ghost has left the building," she said. "Now it's a crime scene. What happened here?" I just shrugged, unable to voice the pathetic, simple truth. He broke my heart. No, that wasn't right. I had broken my own heart, with his help. I had let him. I developed the photos, the acrid smell of the fixer, a familiar, grounding scent. I watched his image appear on the paper in the developing tray, a ghost emerging from the white. The portrait I had taken of him in my mind, the one of the vulnerable, scared man who had asked to kiss me, was being replaced by this new one, a coward who couldn't face the consequences of his own actions. After 10 days of radio silence, something in me snapped. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was staring at a contact sheet of a dozen images of my bedroom door, closed. Firmly, finally closed. And I realized I couldn't live like this. I couldn't go back to being his friend, pretending nothing had happened. And I couldn't live in this state of suspended, agonizing ambiguity. The not knowing was worse than a definitive rejection. I had spent months waiting for him to make a move, to define the situation. I was done waiting. I put on my shoes, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door without a second thought. I took the subway to his neighborhood, my anger a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The entire ride, I rehearsed what I would say. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I would be calm, direct. I just wanted an explanation. A real one. Not a cowardly, middle-of-the-night text message. I deserved to hear it to my face. I stood outside his apartment building for a full 10 minutes, my resolve wavering. What if he wasn't home? What if he was, but he had someone else with him? The thought was a fresh stab of pain. What if he just slammed the door in my face? But the image of that folded blanket, so neat and final, pushed me forward. I buzzed his apartment. The seconds stretched into an eternity. I was about to turn and leave when the speaker crackled to life. "Yeah." His voice was thick, groggy, like I'd woken him up. "It's me," I said, my own voice tight. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of traffic, the buzz of the intercom. Then, a click, and the lock on the main door disengaged. He was letting me in. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with hope, but with a grim, nervous determination. His apartment was a mess. There were takeout containers on the coffee table, clothes draped over a chair, a stack of mail on the floor. It looked like the home of someone who had given up. He was standing in the middle of the room, wearing sweatpants and a rumpled t-shirt, the same uniform of exhaustion he used to wear at my place. He looked terrible. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he hadn't shaved in days. He looked thinner, worn down. The sight of him, so frayed and lost, momentarily deflated my anger, replacing it with a familiar, unwelcome pang of sympathy. I had to remind myself why I was there. "You look like hell," I said. It wasn't what I had planned to say. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, feel like it." Too, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at a spot on the floor, just to the left of my feet. "What are you doing here, Liam? What do you think I'm doing here?" I shot back, my anger flaring up again. You can't do what you did and then send a text message. You don't get to do that." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a misery so profound it startled me. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know. I'm a coward. I know." He ran a hand through his already messy hair, a gesture of pure desperation. I woke up that morning, and you were asleep in your room, and I was on your couch, and everything was quiet. And I panicked. I completely panicked." He started pacing the small living room, his movements agitated, restless. "It was one thing when it was just me being a mess, crashing at your place, being pathetic. It was easy. It didn't mean anything. But that night, when I kissed you, and you kissed me back," he stopped and looked at me, his expression pleading, as if he wanted me to understand something he couldn't articulate. "It meant something," he whispered. "And it terrified me." "Why?" I asked, the single word sharp and pointed. "Why did it terrify you, Julian?" He shook his head, looking away again. "Because of what it makes me. Because I'm not. I've never." He gestured vaguely, helplessly. "I had a plan, you know. A whole life, planned out. College, job, Sarah, house, kids. The whole stupid checklist. And it all fell apart. And I was fine with that. I thought I was. I thought I was just sad about Sarah. But it wasn't just that. I was lonely. Not just I don't have a girlfriend lonely. A different kind. A deeper kind. And the only person that made it better, was you." He was rambling, the words tumbling out in a disorganized, desperate flood. "Coming to your place, it was the only time all day I didn't feel like I was drowning. And I told myself it was just because you were my friend. You're my best friend, Liam. You're solid. You're safe." I repeated the word, and it tasted like ash. "So that's what I am to you? A safety net?" "No," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "No, you're not listening. At first, maybe. But then, it changed. I don't know when. I started looking forward to it too much. I started hating the nights I had to be in a hotel on the other side of the country. I started wanting more. I'd lie there on your couch, pretending to be asleep, and my heart would be beating so fast I was sure you could hear it. I just wanted to be near you. And I didn't understand it. It didn't fit into any box in my life." He stopped pacing and stood in front of me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "That night, when I asked if I could kiss you, that was the first honest thing I'd done in months. And the second I did it, the second you said yes, this voice in my head just started screaming. 'What are you doing? This isn't you. This is a mistake. You're going to ruin the one good thing you have left.'" He took a shaky breath. "So I ran. I ran because I'm a coward. I ran because I was terrified of what it meant about me. And I was terrified of hurting you. I thought if I just cut it off, clean, you could go back to hating me, and it would be easier than you hating me for being a confused, broken mess who used you." The raw, painful honesty of his confession disarmed me completely. My anger evaporated, leaving behind only a deep, aching sadness for both of us. For all the time we had wasted in silence, in misunderstanding. He hadn't been erasing himself from my apartment that morning. He had been trying to protect me, in the most misguided, clumsy way possible. He had been trying to protect our friendship, the very thing his actions were destroying. He thought the kiss was the mistake, but the real mistake was the text message. The real mistake was the running. I stepped forward, closing the small gap between us. He flinched, as if he expected me to hit him. I reached out and put my hand on his arm. His muscles were tense, coiled. "Julian," I said, my voice softer now. "You're an idiot." A tear finally escaped and traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. He let out a wet, choked laugh. "Yeah, I know, you think I haven't been confused." I said, "You think I've had this all figured out?" For months, I have been lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'm going insane. Wondering if I'm inventing feelings that aren't there. Every time you fell asleep on my couch, it was both the best and worst part of my day. You think you were the only one who was terrified. His eyes widened, his gaze finally locking with mine, truly seeing me. "You? Of course me," I said, a little exasperated. "I've been in love with you for years, you moron. Since the library, senior year, the confession, my own confession, hung in the air. It was the first time I had ever said the words aloud. They felt enormous and fragile. Julian just stared at me, his face a canvas of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, fragile hope. Years, he whispered, his voice full of wonder. But, Sarah, you never, I was your friend, I said simply. And you were happy. Or, I thought you were. That was enough. He shook his head slowly, a dazed, uncomprehending motion. I don't understand. There's nothing to understand, I said. I love you. And when you kissed me, it wasn't a mistake. It was the most real thing that has happened to me in a very long time. And when you ran, you didn't just break my heart. You insulted me. You insulted us. You assumed I was so fragile that I couldn't handle your confusion. You assumed I wouldn't be here, in it with you. While you figured your shit out, he closed his eyes, and his whole body seemed to slump with the weight of it all. I'm so sorry, Liam, he breathed. I'm so sorry. He opened his eyes again, and the confusion was gone, replaced by a clear, simple certainty. I don't want to run anymore. He reached out, his hand covering mine on his arm. His touch was firm, grounding. I don't know what this is, or what it means, or who I am in it. But I know I don't want to do it without you. I can't. He took a step closer, his other hand coming up to cup my face, mirroring the gesture he had made on the couch. But this time it was not hesitant. It was definite. Can we try again? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Can I kiss you again? And not as a mistake this time. I didn't need to speak. I just leaned in and closed the distance between us. This kiss was different. It wasn't a question. It was an answer. It was messy and desperate and tasted of salt and regret and a profound, overwhelming relief. It was a beginning. We didn't go back to my apartment that night. We stayed at his. We ordered food, and we talked for hours. We sat on his messy floor and unraveled years of unspoken thoughts, of misinterpreted signals, of missed opportunities. He told me about the slow, creeping loneliness in his relationship with Sarah, the feeling of playing a role he'd outgrown. He told me how my quiet, steady presence had become the one anchor in his chaotic life long before he even understood why. I told him about the rivalry, how his fierce, bright energy had both infuriated and fascinated me from the very beginning. I told him about the agony of the couch, the symbolism of the open door, the way his presence had reshaped the very light and shadow in my home. We were two cartographers, finally comparing maps, realizing we had been charting the same territory all along, just from opposite shores. It was clumsy and awkward and painful at times, but it was honest. For the first time, everything was honest. That night, when we finally fell into bed, exhausted, it was in his room. There was no couch, no pretext, no ambiguity. He fell asleep almost instantly, but this time he didn't turn away. He curled toward me, his arm draped over my waist, his face tucked into the crook of my neck. His breathing was the same deep, rhythmic sound I had memorized over months, but for the first time, it didn't fill me with anxiety. It filled me with a quiet, profound peace. I lay awake for a long time, not listening for footsteps, not staring at a sliver of light from a hallway, but just feeling the solid, grounding weight of him beside me. The current had finally brought me to a new shore, and it felt like coming home. The days that followed were a process of gentle recalibration. We were learning a new language, or rather, we were finally speaking the same one. The gestures that had once been fraught with ambiguity were now simple, direct statements. A hand held as we walked down the street. A kiss goodbye in the morning. Him showing up at my apartment not with a story of exhaustion, but with a simple, I wanted to see you. He still stayed over most nights, but the couch went unused. He would walk straight past it, into my room, and drop his bag on the floor as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And the door, my symbolic, tortured door, was now closed. Not to shut anyone out, but to keep us in. Together. It was a new kind of boundary, one that defined our shared space, not our separation. His friends, the loud, cheerful crowd from the gallery opening, were initially confused. We didn't make a grand announcement. We just started showing up to things together, a subtle shift in our orbit. I'd be at a birthday party at some loud bar, a place that would normally have my nerves shot, but he'd keep a grounding hand on the small of my back, and it made all the difference. He started coming to my studio while I worked, not to talk, but just to be. He'd sit on the old armchair in the corner and read or work on his laptop, content to exist in my quiet space. One of his friends, a blunt guy named Mark, finally pulled me aside one night. "So, you and Julian, huh?" he asked, not unkindly. "I've never seen him this." "Come," I just smiled. Me neither, it was true. The restless, agitated energy that had hummed beneath his surface for so long had dissipated, replaced by a quiet contentment. He was finally comfortable in his own skin, and it was because he had stopped trying to fit into a life that wasn't his. He was building a new one, with me. One afternoon, a few months later, I was framing the prints for my new gallery show. The series was finished. It was called The Open Door. It was the whole story, told in shadow and light. The lonely couch, the waiting, the tension, the final, empty room. Julian came and stood beside me, looking at the images laid out on the floor. He was quiet for a long time, his gaze moving from one photo to the next. He lingered on the final shot, the one of the neatly folded blanket on the empty couch. "I was such an idiot," he said softly, his voice full of a gentle, remembered pain. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. "I'm sorry it took me so long to walk through it." I leaned my head against his shoulder, the gesture now so familiar, so easy. "You're here now," I said. "That's all that matters." He turned his head and kissed my temple. It was a simple, domestic gesture, a piece of our new, quiet life. We are never truly one thing. We are a collection of rooms, some bright and open, others locked and dark, and it is the great, terrifying work of a lifetime to learn how to navigate them. Julian and I had spent years in our separate wings, shouting at each other across the courtyard of our rivalry, then speaking in whispers through the shared wall of our friendship. He had knocked on my door out of loneliness and confusion, and for months, I had been too afraid to do anything but leave it slightly ajar, hoping he would find the courage to push it open himself. What I didn't understand was that courage isn't a solitary act. It is something you build together. It wasn't until I found the courage to walk out of my own apartment and cross the city to knock on his door that we were finally able to meet in the open. Now, the silence in my apartment is different. It's a comfortable, shared silence, filled with the soft sounds of two lives lived in tandem. The clicking of my camera shutter, the tapping of his keyboard, the gentle hiss of the radiator that no longer sounds like a countdown. We began to heal, not in the shouting or the grand declarations, but in the beautiful, honest quiet we had learned, at last, to create together.